Hey everyone, and welcome to another video of Eat Well with Allergies. So in this video, some people don't know, like my brother, don't know at all what some baking terms mean. So in this video, I'm going to be telling you what those mean. So I just basically got these off the internet because I basically know a lot of baking terms just from watching TV shows. So let's get started. So to bake, what does to bake mean? It means to cook in an oven, but make sure to preheat the oven first. Some people don't know the difference between baking soda and baking powder. So the difference between baking soda and baking powder is baking soda is a leavening agent that needs acid to create a chemical reaction when baking. So if you've ever mixed together vinegar and baking soda, you have an explosion almost. And recipes that use baking soda often must be baked immediately after mixing. So, like in my coffee cake, it used baking soda and milk and all that kind of stuff. So it had a chemical reaction. I don't know if I had mixing one, but I mixed it around and there was a ring of bubbles around the mixture. So that is that's for a gingerbread cake, which I haven't done yet, but I'm planning to. So baking soda is when you're mixing it immediately and baking it immediately. Baking powder is a leavening agent that contains both baking soda and the acid agent. So it's already prepared for you. All you have to do is put it in the mixture. So another one is to beat. To stir fast in a rapid circular motion. Beating can be done with a whisk, spoon, or mixer. Blanch is when you partially cook something in boiling water for just a few minutes, then plunge it immediately into cold water to stop it from cooking. So if you've ever blanched green beans or carrots or that kind of thing, you put it immediately in ice water so they keep their color and they're not bland green or really bad orange. So to blend is to thoroughly incorporate ingredients into each other. This is another word for beat, but it is often used when ingredients are turned into liquid, i.e. in a blender. So if you're making a smoothie, it blends it. That's basically what it's saying. To caramelize is when sugars brown and get caramel in color. So caramel is like a dark brown, that kind of thing. It depends on how deep your caramel you want it to be, like a dark brown or a really dark brown, so the sugars are almost burnt. It's very hard to tell. You caramelize sugar when you make, say, creme brulee, but you can also caramelize things that have sugar on them, like natural sugars, like when you grill pineapple or something. Yeah, you see those little grill marks because there's a lot of sugar in the pineapple, lots of natural sugar. Okay, so to chop, to cut into pieces, chop usually just refers to the cutting. Sometimes other words are used in conjunction with chopped. A rough chop would be larger pieces, or a fine chop would be smaller pieces. So in some things, like if you're cutting strawberries or something, it may say a certain kind of chop for that. Some people get confused on what coats the back of a spoon means. So when making puttier sauces that thicken, it's thickened enough when the back of a wooden spoon is covered with the liquid. When you run your finger over it, a line is created and the liquid doesn't run off the back. So when you have a distinctive line where your finger just was, you can tell it's at the stage where it coats the back of a spoon. So if some batters are thick enough where it coats the back of the spoon, or thin enough, I guess. If you run your finger over it and it doesn't slide off, then it coats the back of the spoon. To cream. As a verb, creaming is when you beat butter and sugar until smooth and fluffy with a light and creamy texture. So when you beat, some recipes call for a lot more sugar than the butter, and you want to beat that really fast because if you have cold butter, you have to mix it really, really fast so it doesn't go everywhere and all that. So a lot of recipes start with creaming. Some people have reverse creaming, and it's just a lot of, a lot of cake recipes require certain methods of mixing, like reverse creaming, whisking, that kind of thing. I don't try to make sense of it all. Okay, another one is to crimp. So on a pie crust, it says to crimp. What does crimp mean? Crimp means to finish the edges of a pie crust by pinching between two fingers. So, like, I think it was for my caramel apple pie, it required pie crust. So if, say the pie crust is right around here, and you're pushing between two fingers, but you're also pushing this finger in the middle, and it creates a little divot. So you have two ridges between these two fingers, and you have a valley, say, a space where your finger was just marking it. So that's what crimp means. Okay, hold on a second. Hold on a sec while I give myself a cup, drink of water. Okay, next one. To cut in. It's usually done with a pastry cutter. Some people don't have those. This is a way to incorporate butter, shortening, or other fat into dry ingredients. It's a process that's often done when making pie crust, crumbles, biscuits, or scones. The mixture will be the size of dry peas when you're done cutting in. In lieu of a pastry cutter, you can use 2 forks or 2 knives to cut in ingredients. So, when making pastry, you mix the dry ingredients and then you just cut in butter, or lard, or shortening, or oil sometimes, I guess, but some kind of fat. And you're slowly adding in butter if you're mixing the pie crust. And sometimes it's mostly cold butter because you don't want the butter to melt into a pie crust. So a lot of times you're cutting in butter and you're mixing at the same time. Some people have a pastry cutter to cut the butter into small pieces while incorporating the flour. I do not, so I have to do it by hand. So it's a little difficult to cut in ingredients, but it's very useful if you want a very flaky and delicious pie crust, I guess. Okay, so the next one. Some people don't know what a dash is. A dash is a little less than an eighth of a teaspoon. So it's a little more than a pinch. So 2 pinches, I guess. Some people don't even know what a pinch is. Pinch, a dash, I don't remember what the third one is, but it's basically a little less than an eighth of a teaspoon. So it's a very little amount, but it still makes a difference. So, some people don't know what dice is. Dice means to cut into small, uniform, square pieces, usually bite-sized pieces. The next one, to drizzle, usually done with icing, glaze, or melted chocolate. This is the process of dripping the icing off of a fork or spoon onto your finished recipe. Dry ingredients. What do they mean by dry ingredients? Well, as it says, dry ingredients means ingredients that have no liquid and can be measured in dry measuring cups, i.e. flour and sugar. So some people have you mixing the wet ingredients all together. Some recipes have you mixing it all together at once. Some recipes you're mixing certain ingredients with certain ingredients in a sort of process, like my coffee cake. You had coffee and milk together. You had milk and baking soda together. You had flour and other stuff, flour, sugar, that kind of stuff together. So and eggs. You had to mix together the 2 wet components, the coffee and the milk. And then you had to mix, once you cooled that down, you had to mix together the eggs into the mixture. And then you added the dry ingredients, the flour, the sugar, all that kind of stuff. So that's what they mean by dry ingredients. It's usually what it says. It's ingredients that are dry, so flour, sugar, baking soda, baking powder, all that kind of stuff. So the next one is dust. So when you're making pie crust, it says dust the counter or the whatever you're laying your pastry on. So to dust means a little sprinkling. Actually, I misinformed you. Dust means like on a cake. If you want to dust some powdered sugar on it, it means that. So you're dusting something on top of a finished recipe. So on a cake or a pie or that kind of thing. So to fold is a process of stirring that gently combines something heavy into something light so that the heavy ingredient doesn't ruin the light one. For example, you often fold whipped cream into a thicker mixture, like peanut butter pie. Folding ensures the mixture will still set up at the end of the recipe. So, in my last recipe, I made blueberry muffins. I had to fold in the blueberries so they weren't crushed. Well, I used frozen blueberries, but if you used fresh blueberries, you would have to fold them in to make sure that they weren't crushed. So the next one, hold on. Oh, we got a lot to go through. Okay, so a glossy sheen. Now this one I've not heard of. This is a new one for me. That is what cookies get in the oven. Once the glossy sheen is done, the cookies are done baking. So I have not encountered this because some people time it. I use the timer. But I understand what they're saying. Cookies usually have a glossy top when you're putting them in the oven. When that glossy top is disappeared, your cookies are done, I guess. It's another way of telling if your cookies are done, I guess. Okay, to grease means to prepare pans or pots or that kind of stuff so they don't stick to the food. Greasing your pans can be done with a nonstick cooking spray, butter, or shortening or oil. Now, some recipes require greasing the pans, like brownies or something like that, and it doesn't require flouring it in turn. But it still prohibits food from sticking to the mixture. Now, grease and flour means you're greasing your pan just like it says to, and then you're adding a bit of flour. So the way I do it is I swirl the flour. I thoroughly coat the flour over the bottom of the pan, and then I go to the sides because then the flour spills out all the time. So I go over to a trash can and I tap, and it goes to the next part. I keep turning, tapping until it coats the entire cake pan. So that's what it means by grease and flour. This is usually done when making a cake for easy removal. Now, knead is done mostly when working with biscuit or yeasted dough. Kneading is the process of folding, pushing, and turning the dough until it becomes malleable and not sticky. So, leavening, some people know what leavening is, some people don't. An ingredient that helps your baked goods rise. So, baking soda, baking powder, that kind of stuff. That's what it means by leavening. Baking soda and baking powder are both leavening agents. Okay, lukewarm. Some people don't know what lukewarm is. Lukewarm is basically neither hot nor cold, usually around 100 to 105 degrees. Okay, so this one I have not heard of. Mix until moistened. Stir or beat just until the wet ingredients and dry ingredients are mixed together, then stop. Also called mix until just combined. So that one I have heard of. I have not heard mix until moistened. So I understand what they're saying to mix just until combined. So that one I understand. So here's another small measurement. A pinch. It's less than a dash, literally the amount you get when you pinch a spice or other ingredients between your thumb and forefinger. So, these two fingers. How much you can get into your hand from these two fingers and put into the mixture. That's how much a pinch is. Literally, it's a pinch of something. So, preheat. I hope you people know what a preheat is. But if you don't, it means to heat the oven before baking. Always fully preheat the oven at least 15 minutes before baking. I do this before I make every one of my recipes and videos. I do it before I start videoing because it will heat up while I am mixing the ingredients together. So, we're getting down to it, I hope. Maybe 10 more. So, to proof is to let dough rise and rest. When talking about activating some yeast, proofing means mixing yeast with hot water and allowing it to bubble and awaken. So, if you've ever made a yeast dough, you're usually mixing lukewarm water, 100 to 105 degrees. Well, actually, usually 110 degrees of water, and with some yeast and maybe some sugar, because sugar makes happy yeast. Salt prohibits the yeast a little bit. So you're mixing hot water or warm water with yeast to waken up and for it to activate. So to punch, there's another definition for to punch. But in baking terms, it means in between risings of bread and other such dough, you're asked to deflate it by punching it down in between. So, when you have a yeast dough, like for cinnamon rolls, that kind of thing, you are punching down the dough to roll it out, and it's more flexible than if you immediately rolled it out after you kneaded it. It can't move anywhere. It needs to relax and bloom, I guess. It needs to rise up because the yeast is activated. Now, the next one is roaring boil. Rapidly boiling with lots of bubbles. So, it's a very, very hot thing you don't want to mess with, a rolling boil. The next one is scant. This one I have not heard of. In terms of measurement, a scant cup of flour is measured just below the cup line, just less than the amount called for. So it's a little less than a cup of flour, not like 3/4, all that kind of stuff. You basically don't push the flour down and scrape off the top. You basically have a little less than a cup. Now, to scald is to heat a mixture just below the boiling point, before it gets to 212 degrees, basically. So, to simmer is just before a mixture boils. After it scalds is when it simmers. Little bubbles form around the edges of the pan. So, just before boiling, some soups you want to simmer because it slowly cooks the vegetables or meat or all that kind of stuff. So, softened is when butter or cream cheese or other similar ingredients is no longer hard to the touch, often called room temperature. So, this is a very difficult one to define because there's a fine line between soft peaks and stiff peaks. If you're whipping egg whites for a meringue or something and it calls for soft peaks, this is what it means when it says that. When referring to egg whites or whipped cream, soft peaks are when the mixture is soft and rounded when the beaters are pulled away from the mixture. Now, on the opposite effect, stiff peaks is when the mixture holds its shape when the beaters are pulled away from the mixture. So the egg white, if you pull your beaters up and it just is almost dropping off the beaters, that's a little less than a soft peak if it's holding the mixture. And here's another one that I've learned. Some people, if they're in stiff peaks, if you turn the bowl upside your head, it will not do anything because it's in stiff peaks. It won't move. So that's another way to test your stiff peaks. I wouldn't recommend it. I've never done soft peaks or stiff peaks because I'm allergic to eggs. But some people need it. So, last 5. So, before we get into cooking terms. So, to stir is to combine ingredients in a circular motion. So, very simple. Wet ingredients are liquid ingredients or ingredients that are wet, i.e. oil, water, or peanut butter, I guess. So, another one, last 3 here, to whip. Beating or stirring rapidly with a whisk to add air and volume into a mixture. So you're basically doing this motion very, very fast to incorporate air into it. That's what a mixer is for. It can do it without any work of your muscles. All you have to do is touch the knob. It's very handy. So to yield is the amount of servings estimated for a recipe. Now the last one for baking terms. The zest. The colorful outside peel of citrus fruit. So citrus fruit is, a guy at our church actually didn't know what citrus fruit was. So citrus fruit is lemons, oranges, limes, clementines, mandarins, all that kind of stuff. I think that those are the most of the ones I've encountered, but there are a couple more. So it means to the colorful outside of peel of citrus fruit, also known as grated peel. You want to use the colorful part, not the white pith underneath. That part is disgusting. To grate zest, use a microplane grater or the smallest part of a box grater.